You're listening to Weather Brains. They're kind of a big deal.
Oh, yeah. Weather Brains, episode number 812. This is for the 9th of August, 2021, getting into the core of the Atlantic hurricane season. Looks like we might have Fred on the board here fairly soon. We'll talk about that later during the weather roundup, but I spy with my little eyes Aubrey Urbanowitz, who is in Harrisonburg, Virginia, a lovely place to be any time of the year.
Not this week.
What? What?
You know, usually we don't get a lot of humidity in the summer. We get a little bit, but this week is definitely going to be one of the most miserable weeks in recent memory. It's going to be hot and humid. Yeah, so it's and August is actually usually not bad for us. August, compared to the Northeast, I mean, I grew up in New England, and that heat the first couple of weeks in August is oppressive. The humidity is miserable. Here in Virginia in the mountains, August is usually not too bad, but no, said the weather gods this year.
So let's just get right down to it. What's your dew point going to run this week? What's the dew point?
Probably 65, maybe 67 on Thursday.
Troy, you feel
that is bad.
You feel no pity for her, do you?
This lady needs a real dew point, Troy. Give her a real dew point.
And I was going to say, those people in Houston and in New Orleans just absolutely, Aubrey, are sitting there going 65.
I know.
On a good day, we're 75. So
you go down the road east of the Blue Ridge, and it is 75.
Yeah, I know. Yep.
On the western side of the Blue Ridge, it's 60s is oppressive for us. Know your audience, and yeah. It's going to be a tough week.
The dew point just up the road from here in Tuscaloosa is 78 right now.
Oh,
78. So
the New Orleans Naval Air Station is 81.
Oh my gosh.
Oh, really? I'm happy to say in Austin, we're quite dry. Our dew point's at 70.
Oh, yeah.
So, you are. Yeah. not too bad.
It's a dry heat.
68. Yeah,
but Aubrey,
we're in the world of green dew points over here.
Really, but Aubrey, it really is, I guess, in a way. If they're not used to it, I could see where that would be.
60s,
all relative.
60s is not bad for us. I mean, I think we had a couple of days in July where it did hit 70.
Right.
But that's oppressive here. When it gets to 69, 70 here, that is, we're done.
So Jen, tell us about the dew point where you are.
It's 68. Yeah, we had some good rain a couple hours ago, about 0.68, I think is what was measured. So we needed it because it was a little crispy here this week. Now it's hot and muggy, and we've got rain in the forecasts in Ohio every day this week. And it's going to be got the stickies going on. So, but I'll take the rain for sure because it was really getting dry here.
I guess you've been watching the tornado activity west of Chicago this evening.
I have. Yeah, it has been very active. Several tornadoes, north central Illinois, Lily Lake area. I think it's Kirkland area. That area had some damage. And so the guys on our Tornado Talk server have been following that. I do not have any radio stations that go live there. So I've been quiet radio wise, but we've been watching it on the server and keeping our eyes on that. So it's been very active. A lot of photogenic tornadoes coming out. I just saw, well, I guess I better not say that's your pick of the week.
Yeah. Don't spoil it.
Sorry, I almost spoiled it. I know, but it was. I retweeted it. It was impressive.
Yeah. All right. Well, Bill Murray, it's going to be a great show tonight. I'll let you bring in our guest.
Yes, it is, and I'm going to pass it back to Jen so she can bring in our guest because I don't have any job tonight.
But he's made me do it again to take over the whole show.
Jen is becoming the guest booking officer here. I mean, this is great.
Slowly but surely.
No. I'm just the apprentice.
And by the way, let us welcome Kim, who just joined us. It's great to have Kim. She missed. So Kim,
all right.
How are you? Good to have you back.
Hi, Kim.
Hi, guys. So good to be with you. And oh, man, I feel like it's been ages since I've seen Aubrey, too. And even Troy.
Yeah.
Mark Elliott brings out the best in this crowd.
That's right.
Yeah.
All right. Well,
Awesome.
Jen, let's bring in Mark before he runs and hangs up on us.
I know. I know.
Oh, I have breaking news. Look what just came from eBay.
Well, wait a minute.
We interrupt this program for a CBS Radio Net Alert Bulletin.
Just out of the mailbox. Anybody know who that is on the cover of Time magazine in 1956? He's probably like Troy. He's probably a fellow of the AMS.
Oh, yeah, we got some news about Troy.
That's more breaking news. Carl Gustav Rossby.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Time magazine
I never know what this guy looked
Dr.
like.
Martin was talking about last week. Isn't that cool?
How'd you find that on eBay? That's cool.
$5.55.
Oh, you're kidding me. That's cool.
That's the best $5.55 I've spent in a while. So anyway, sorry about that.
Show title.
That's right.
Yeah. All right, Jen,
All
go.
right, I'm ready. So tonight's guest is an award-winning on-camera meteorologist and storm specialist for the Weather Channel. He holds his bachelor's degree in meteorology and environmental physics, that's easier for me to say, from Rutgers University, and master's of science in earth and atmospheric sciences from Georgia Tech. He is a champion for climate causes, loving husband and dad of 2 cuties, and he is my friend, Mark Elliott. Welcome to Weather Brains.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, everybody.
It's awesome. I'm so glad to have you on here. Bill's been putting the pressure on for guests, and, I'm like, we got to get Mark on here. So I wrote you last week. And
well, you only get Mark and that guy who was the anchorman. What was his name? Bill Curtis?
Bill Curtis.
That guy. Yeah. I mean, you're 2 for 2.
I'm set now.
Bill put the pressure on, and she's like, well, I'm out of good people now.
No. No,
we
you
told her
are
to
the
get
best.
the ball guy from the Weather Channel.
Yeah,
so,
that's right.
Jim was busy. Jim was booked already. So.
No, we got you. And I'm excited to have everyone get to know who you are, know your life story, what brought you to the Weather Channel, and what really makes your heart beat fast in terms of the different causes that you're involved with. So I'm excited. So let's start with your life story. You grew up in New Jersey, and talk about, just your life growing up and what got you into weather.
Gosh, I mean, a shout out to one of my oldest friends, Danielle, because I don't remember this. But she tells the story of remembering that I was giving her a weather forecast in her sandbox in the backyard of her house.
Wow.
So I guess I just always knew that this was something I was going to be doing. I can go back to a couple of points along the way that I do remember, unlike that one. There was a pretty significant thunderstorm in elementary school, and trees were falling, one of which came into the window of the I guess, cafetorium, the gym/cafeteria, where back then would be where all the kids would be put, right? They're like, oh, I know the safe room, the big flat giant roof with the big open space and a wall of windows. That's where we all were. And a tree fell and shattered the glass over some of the kids that were playing. So that was one. Another was, it may have been the same event, or my brain just combined the two because I was too young to really remember. But I remember watching a tree fall in my backyard, massive tree. You could hear the boom and the whole house shook. So those two events really stuck with me. And so there's something to that. I'm not the only meteorologist that tells a story about a tree falling being kind of the instigator of our path down this bad idea that just continues. And then, my dad was involved in the Veterans Affairs Hospital. That was his job from start to finish. Started in pharmacy, but eventually moved over to emergency preparedness for the hospital system, which back when I was a kid meant, could the hospital stay on for a natural disaster? It slowly evolved into kind of information security and terrorism, and what if a bomb went off, and things evolved. But back in the day, it was really about environmental concerns. So he was brought into South Florida after Andrew, and he was brought into the North Dakota floods in the 90s and the Mississippi floods and about that same time. And so there was a channel that was on TV that was talking about all the places where my dad was. And so I just started watching and never stopped, because the Weather Channel and I are almost exactly the same age, without giving too much away. And so I don't know a time without the Weather Channel. And so I started watching, and that just became the path.
Well, that was my question, Mark. I couldn't figure out how old you were from Wikipedia or anything, because you do a good job keeping that age secret, and you just let the cat out of the bag. But that means you were watching the Weather Channel at a young age.
Yes,
Did
I was
it
born in
influence you in
82.
any way?
It's not a secret. So yeah, early 80s. I'm an 80s kid, and 90s kid, I guess, if you consider the rest of adolescence as the formation years. Was very excited to go to a Green Day concert the other week. If that tells you anything.
Yeah, there you go.
So yeah, that is my that's still my music of choice, I suppose.
So do you have some favorite Weather Channel memories from those younger days? Because I think we all do. Favorite
of
OCMs or anything like that?
Dave Schwartz is probably the answer that a lot of people give, but I hesitate to almost say it because it's different. It has a different meaning now than it did. But there was like a representation for me watching Dave Schwartz as I was a Jewish kid. I grew up in an area of New Jersey where there was not a lot of Jews. I was usually the only Jewish person in my entire class. No one understood the holidays I was taking off for. I was more, I was teaching about it more than the teachers were, even though I didn't have any clue what I was saying at that point. And then there's Dave Schwartz speaking Yiddish on the Weather Channel. And so it was really a thrill to get to work with Dave twice, right? I was there right before he was, he left the Weather Channel for a while, but he started in radio. So we had some things to talk about. I'm jumping ahead, but I started in radio too. And then he came back, and I was on the TV side, and we hosted some shows together. And I told him at one point, I think during a commercial break, that when they would tell you, you have those assignments at school, like list the 5 people, real, fictional, alive, dead, doesn't matter, 5 names that you would want to sit down at a table and have dinner with. One of them was always Dave Schwartz. And so I told him this, and he's like, well, let's go have dinner. And so I will never forget that night, right? My wife and I went to Dave and his wife's house, and another couple came with us, and we just had the best time ever. And he is exactly who you saw on TV every day, which is something that I try to be as well.
That's funny because I have a Weather Channel story like that, because I just adored the Weather Channel. Going from NOAA Weather Radio to the Weather Channel was like.
Don't say adored with the past tense. You're killing me, Small.
No. I mean,
What are you trying to say, Bill?
Yeah, past tense.
Crazy about the Weather Channel, in those days. But my favorite on-camera meteorologist was somebody nobody remembers except those hardliners like Dave Schwartz and people that we've had on the show before. That those are just treasures. That show 159 with Dave Schwartz is one you need to go back and listen to. Because that really was one of the great shows that we've ever done. But I was in love with an on-camera meteorologist named Gay Dawson. I don't know if anybody remembers her, but I just thought she was the most beautiful lady in the world in those early days. And I don't even know where she is now. I beg all the OCMs I ever have, if they know anything of her, to get her on the show so we can at least talk to her and I can profess my unrequited love for her from 40 years ago.
Write that one down, Jen.
It's already on the list.
Sure she's already on the top of the list. She's batting over for that right now. But that's really cool. My favorite Weather Channel story, though, was Jerry Tracy got picked to come to Birmingham, and I was managing the hotel that they put him up at when he came to Channel 13. So I just went up to him in the lobby, said, "Loved you on the Weather Channel. Welcome to Birmingham, Jerry." And that's how we, got to be friends. And he's still here, kicking along on Channel 13 in Birmingham, and a great, great person. And really helped me a lot because he, took the time on Wednesday nights to teach me meteorology. in the late 80s and early 90s, and called me up one day and said, I got you a job at Channel 42, which was like the bottom of the pack, had a 1 rating, but I didn't care. Saturday nights, one show. I loved it. It was a great fun 5 years, and I hated to let go of it, but it was a lot of fun. So, but I'm through monopolizing now, Jen. Back to you.
Okay. Well, now that we've established that you started your forecasting career when you were at least 3 or 4 years old, and you decided that you're going to go to college, you picked Rutgers University. So talk about your college career and the meteorology department there, the whole program, and what was your focus when you were at school?
Yeah, picking Rutgers was partially because of the location, right? I was in New Jersey already, so that certainly helped. But I knew what I wanted to do, so that helps too. As if kids are watching, that's reasonably rare, right? And I only applied to schools that had meteorology degree programs. I applied to Penn State, I applied to Cornell, I applied to Rutgers, and that was, I think, pretty much it. And wound up getting into just about all of them. But as it turns out, Sorry, I'm laughing because my dog is scratching at the door behind the camera, trying to make his official appearance. And I might have to let him in because he's barking. He's going to wake up the whole house.
Well, Nate Johnson had a rule too, Mark, before he went on sabbatical. If we can hear the animal, you have to introduce us to the animal.
All right. Well, here, I'll bring him out. Here they come.
Mark's barking up the wrong tree here. The show is going right to the dogs.
It is indeed a they. Here's Wembley. He likes him.
Oh, he's so fluffy.
Yes, thank you. Oh, yeah, you're famous now. See, you want to get
Wow.
Yes.
He's the non-shy one, as you can tell.
He loves his daddy.
And
If you need a babysitter, I will drive down for Virginia.
And Porter is going to be harder to see. There's Porter.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Oh.
She's our baby. She's the new one. So we're trying to figure that out still with the two of them. But they love each other, and hopefully they won't be too disruptive now that they're out here with me. But the chances are they still will be.
It is okay, Mark. We welcome all pets and babies and anything that comes in. You have to be introduced.
The babies are asleep. Things have gone really wrong if they make their way out here.
Got through the defenses.
Yeah. And then there's a mutiny on our hands, and I may not be in charge by tomorrow.
I agree.
So what were we talking? Picking schools.
Yeah.
Penn State's the big one, right, Jen?
That was an awesome school.
Right?
We are.
I'm a fan. Penn State.
Yeah, that school in Pennsylvania, as I fondly call it. I kind of thought I was going to wind up there, really. But it was a money factor. I had applied to the honors program of both colleges, and Rutgers wanted to throw a bunch of money at the honors program students, and their acceptance date was coming up. And I hadn't heard anything from Penn State's equivalent program yet. And so I said, okay, I accepted to Rutgers, and like 2 days later, I got the Penn State acceptance, and then had to turn it down because I had already signed in, and unlike college football signees, it was more binding than some of those. And so it wound up being probably the best thing that ever happened, because that school was right for me, even though I was a little bit perturbed about it at the time. Rutgers is the small but mighty meteorology program in a giant university. And so you have the best of both worlds. You can be a big fish in a little pond in the meteorology program, and you can still be a small fish in a giant pond of the university, and thus have all the access to the libraries, the research, the a real football team, although calling it real may be a little bit of a stretch. Real to me, And so, we had opportunities there that I don't think I necessarily would have had I gone to a much bigger program, right? Because we were known. Each name in that program was known by each professor. And you guys all know a lot of the names of the class, the people that I came up with. And so that it was just the right thing. I mean, some of my best buds to this day, you got, Megan Lincoln at Swiss Re, you've got Matt Lanza down in the Houston area, Andrew Durante in Denver. And so these are names that the weather community knows still. And we were all in one class of 7, 8, 9 people by the end of it. So that was really something. And it gave me the opportunity to say yes to everything, right? When I was at Rutgers, I was not instrumental in starting it, but I did benefit from it. Started up Rutgers RUTV, right? And so suddenly there was weather on the Rutgers television that was basically put into their TV Guide channel. So anyone that was looking for TV Guide, what was on TV, saw us on a loop. And we had certain days that we could record, and it became a big thing, right? It became studio space that never existed before, and all this stuff. First chance really doing broadcast. It allowed me to say yes to all these different internships. I interned with National Weather Service Mount Holly. If I was at Penn State, how many of the Penn State students get to go to the National Weather Service? There's so many of them. I think anyone that said yes got to do that internship from Rutgers. There was only so many of us, especially by the time you were a junior or senior. And so if you wanted to do it, you could. And so I did. I interned at News 12 New Jersey, and James Gregorio became just a huge champion of me. He's still there at this point, and we talk back and forth. He was the first guy at a real TV channel that let me plan a green screen and do stuff like that. So I was able to do all this stuff that I don't think I would have been able to do otherwise.
I love this theme of the small school being sometimes a really good school, at least the small program in a large school. I felt like I had a very similar situation at Purdue, where we had the same size of class as you mentioned. It was just about 10 of us, but we were embedded in this very large, huge university, and especially a very large engineering school. So we had lots and lots of people in our other classes. And I think there is really something to be said for that, because you do get a lot of opportunity. I don't know if you had a local AMS chapter, if you ran for officer for that, but it was nice to be in a situation where there was a little less competition for that. I ran for treasurer of our chapter because I was a double major with economics. And they said, oh, well, you know about money, sure. And then they sent me to the AMS annual meeting, and I was able to get all this opportunity. And, there really is a lot to be said for this. I'm curious, though, as you've talked about how things like that broadcast opportunity sort of started when you were there, how did you get the sort of inclination toward that, especially being at a smaller program where they didn't have a pre-existing broadcast track? Did you always know, because the Weather Channel had been such a foundational part of, it sounds like your whole life, your childhood was this constant companion. I love how you described that. When did you know?
I was a theater guy. That's really how I had the chance to how I even considered it. In fact, I think when I started the program, I kind of not looked down is the wrong word, but just thought it probably wasn't for me. But I was already going bald, and when I left high school, right? I didn't see that as the best look for TV at age 18, whatever, and I just assumed there was so many others that would be doing it different or better or from bigger places. And so I was like, well, I'm a giant nerd. I love the research. I'll go to school forever and do that. I'm still comfortable in that world too. But I think because I was already doing theater and musical theater and Shakespearean theater, and I was talking to the back of the room and still being told that I'm too loud, speaking of too loud, You may hear Dobbins Air Force Base jets going by at the moment. So I already had this, I knew how to memorize lines. I knew how to do an out cue if I had to.
That is so fabulous. I have to say, I was actually going to ask if it was that you had theater as a background, and I don't even know why, but you just have that like presence, right? Yeah. I love that it was Shakespearean theater too. And I have to just say, I have so much kinship for you right now between the small program, big school, and the Air Force Base nearby. Yeah. Because I live right by Tinker, like 4 miles as the crow flies. And so I really appreciate that and feel you. And
we're besties. I knew it. I knew all along.
We're like the exact same age too. And I too cherish Green Day. So we have a lot going for us.
There we go.
But awesome. I'm also just really curious. Okay, so you had all that going for you in that undergrad experience, and you did a lot of theater. It sounds like, though, you did a more serious academic track and like going to Georgia Tech. That strikes me as a fairly, serious research program for your master's.
Yeah.
I love just these, stories about people coming to Crossroads and, tell us a little bit about what you did there and what you learned out of that experience that situated you in a really nice place to come in to broadcast.
Yeah, jumping ahead a little bit, and we might go back and forth, because I went to Georgia Tech after I was already at the Weather Channel. And so I was doing full-time Weather Channel at the same time as a full-time Georgia Tech master's program. And I consider that my training for last year because I just said, I'll sleep next year. I don't need sleep this year. It'll be fine. I'll sleep later. I say that because with everything that was happening in the world last year, I had 2 kids at home. My job, as you know, doesn't stop. My wife's job is in healthcare, so she doesn't stop. And we had 2 kids that were then doing virtual schooling and under the age of 5. So their life didn't stop. And it wasn't like we could just put them in front of their computer and say, you go do this for a while. Like, they needed help. And so most of last year, I switched my schedule to nights. So I would be up at 6:30-ish when the kids would get up, and then, we'd help with school. And at some point, my wife and I would switch out. And then she'd go back to work and I'd do some stuff. And then I'd actually go to work at the end of the day and then sometime come home and start it all again later. So yeah, it wasn't a lot of sleep last year. And there wasn't a lot of sleep during that time when I was full-time Weather Channel and full-time Georgia Tech. There just wasn't. As Jen remembers very well, I believe my off days were Tuesday, Wednesday, and my hours at work were 3 a.m. to noon. So there were days that I would then go to school after that, or I would go to school on Tuesday, Wednesday, and, it didn't really happen because my off time was writing giant pages of Greek letters. That's what I did with my free time.
Yeah. Well, let's get you at the Weather Channel. You're graduated, and within how long? A couple of days? You're walking into the radio department to talk about that.
So I'll back up a bit because it's something that Kim mentioned before. I had, in one of the many things of saying yes to doing things at Rutgers, my buddy John Crafting was doing the WRSU radio, and he's a year older than I, and said, hey, this is something that I think you'd be good at. Do some radio work with me. And so we both wound up kind of sharing some of the radio news hits for weather. And then he graduated and I did more of it that next year, and then passed it on to someone else after me. And so I had this radio experience. And you mentioned going to being part of a local chapter. We had a student chapter of the AMS. Rutgers had never gone as a group to the AMS conference until our class said, hey, this is something we're doing. We just said we're doing it, and wound up going to the AMS conference. And there was a Weather Channel booth, and I was so proud of this resume at this point, right? I had all this experience and working at the photochemical assessment monitoring site as their student intern. Like, I had everything, any field you wanted, I had a little piece of. I'm like, I'm so in. on this internship. I got this, handed in the resume, never heard no, much less yes, right? Never heard anything, which is how a lot of these work. Didn't understand that at the time, but understand it much better now. But yeah, didn't hear anything at all. And but apparently, because I had radio experience on that resume from an attempt at a student internship at an AMS conference, floated around the Weather Channel building for, I think, a year and a half. And as I was graduating, I got a phone call, like probably maybe 2 weeks before graduation, got a phone call in my dorm. So we still had phones. So again, showing the age, there were still phones. From a manager, Ken, at the Weather Channel radio department. And my roommate answered, and he thought it was a prank call and started acting the way that my roommate did, which was awesome, unless it actually happened to be somebody from the Weather Channel. So he eventually caught on that it was not a joke and got me the phone, and I got on. And so they offered me this position because somebody was going on maternity leave almost exactly when I was graduating. And again, they had this resume. I don't know if I was number 300 on the call list, right? Because they're like, there's no moving expenses. We won't help you find a place. This job starts in August and it ends in November, because at the time you couldn't work in the month of December or it grandfathered you into being full-time. It was the rules of the company we worked for at the time. It's 4 days a week. It can't be any more. It can't be any more than 30 hours a week. And of course I said, I'll take it. I said yes to coming down. I graduated. I waited for like an official offer letter, which they didn't know how to do because it was a part-time thing. So that I think took longer than the actual job. But once I had that, I flew down one weekend. I rented a 1-year apartment for a 3-month job, flew back, packed my whole life in a station wagon, and moved down the next weekend, and then started that Monday. And I'm still waiting for them to correct the error, kind of Office Space style, and realize that I was really only supposed to work till November of 2004. Yeah.
Nobody from the Weather Channel's listening. I'm sure.
They're not watching. No. At some point, that's how my exit will go. I will get fired, and it'll be like, well, you're not really fired. It's more we're just correcting the error. And and so I as it turns out, as I was already there and working, and Jen had trained me up and taught me what I was doing there, somebody got fired. And I was already there, and it was the summer of 2004, and I think maybe 4 days in, I was live in Miami as one of the many hurricanes were coming in, partially because I guess they thought I could handle it, and partially because there was nobody else to open their mouth. They were just so overworked and understaffed, and it was just impossible because every storm that year came through Florida. And so I had the benefit of being there already, and I was hired for a real job. That's how I got to the Weather Channel, by not getting a summer internship.
That is incredible. Okay, so many parts of that are incredible, but you glossed over something I think our listening audience would really love to hear a little bit more about, and that's you were trained up by Jen.
Yeah.
What about that?
Oh, dear.
This is going to be good.
For a long time. Jen was the weekend manager there for, that wasn't the right term, but the weekend.
Kind of the lead, I guess.
The longest.
The whole Weather Channel? You never told us that, Jen.
No. I was working weekends. Yeah, I had been there since 1997. And so I left for a couple of years, came back,
Did I just give something away? Sorry.
No. But I was kind of the lead weekend person, so I guess they figured I could teach them all that I know on how to speak weather on the radio, and so we were. I don't know how many weekends we worked together.
All of them.
And and then during the week too, and then I had the opportunity.
Jen and our buddy Sally, those two really taught me how to interact through a microphone, how to talk about weather without a map, how to, you can't say here, right? There's nothing to point to. You can't say there, right? And those are skills that I still use every single day because I know that nobody's watching the channel, any channel really, and just watching, right? You're doing so many other things. And so I try not to catch myself saying, this area or here or any of those things that require you to be looking, because I assume that nobody wants to look at this, right? They're doing other things. And yeah, so Jen and Sally and a couple others really showed me the ropes and taught me how to do that and how to be fun and engaging and tell a story and tell a weather story and interact with people that you've never seen before through a device. That's all. I give all that to Jen and Sally and a couple others there. Well before.
You're sweet. Well, he was easy to teach because as you guys can see, his personality just shines, and it's trying to tell a story in 30 seconds or less.
Yep.
And Mark did an awesome job of being able to do that. And so we worked in radio together for 4 years, right? From 2004 to 2008, and then in 2008
you left. I kind of started.
Then you left
away
me.
From radio, but
you left me all by myself. No, but you had different, and I want you to talk about what led you to your TV, because if you thought they're getting you to radio was interesting, wait till you find out how I got to the TV part. So talk about Lightning Rod.
Yeah, a series of fortunate events and unfortunate events within them. So, Kim, you had asked about the graduate work, right? I had kind of said, okay, I'm going to do this graduate work because I was not at all confident that I was going to still be at the Weather Channel, right? It's broadcast. I didn't, I was new and I was totally unsure of myself. I had hey, cut it out, you two.
Hey!
Yeah, get a room.
Show title.
And so, I was still keeping my options open. I was trying to figure out if I was going to go out of broadcast and back into research and what I would study and just what to do next. And kind of within that realm, I was and am. I'm always thinking about, where am I now? Where is it going? Where should I be? All these things. And part of that is probably a lack of confidence in myself, but maybe it's healthy in the long run. And I digress. So, NBC was buying the Weather Channel, and they were looking at, who else was in the building to do some of these other jobs that were opening up. Weather.com was exploding as a medium in the early 2000s. There was suddenly video that was available on the site that was so much more engaging and interactive and personalized and local than it ever was before. But to do that, you have to have so many more people, and NBC is coming in and they're a real business and they had private equity, and there was not a way that they were hiring the number of people that would be needed to actually do that. And so they looked from within, and again, happened to be there, and they had anyone that really wanted to kind of throw their hat in the ring and say, okay, do you want to do some video content? We had to audition for some of the NBC people and for some of the on-camera meteorologists. Mike Seidel was in the room because he was doing a lot of these when he wasn't in the field. He was doing what was known as a broadband shift because broadband, right? That was the internet. It was broad. It was so fast. It was broadband. Yeah, it was weird times. In any case, that was the name of the shift, and you basically did 100 local video forecasts as fast as you could to get out of the room. Here's your local forecast for New York. Here's your local forecast for Philadelphia. Here's your local forecast for Baltimore. And you went through the top 100 markets, and so they wanted other people to be able to do that. So I transitioned at the time. I guess I was, Jen, you might remember more than I do. I think I was still in radio, and
you're still doing radio
and doing these broadband shifts like for fun to do these other shifts. And so I was doing these videos for weather.com, and at that time I was like, okay, I'm like, this is fine. But, I really like radio. I like radio as a medium. I think that there's a spot for it. And so I started kind of pitching this wonky idea and said, okay, what if there was a radio call-in show the way that Mad Money on CNBC started as, I think, Real Money, as a radio call-in show for finances, to try to teach you finance in a fun way. That's why that's why Jim Cramer is still hitting all those soundboard things like a maniac, is because he was doing a radio show. That's his radio soundboard still, more or less, from what I understand. Okay, so what if there was a weather show that was kind of like that, or maybe kind of like Car Talk on NPR, where they could talk about, cars, but also a bunch of other things and be entertaining, and then take calls and answer questions live-ish, and then play it back for America and syndicated, right? These are things that the Weather Channel didn't know how to do, but NBC certainly did, and they had NBC Radio, and they knew how to do that. Or maybe it was like a little bit of The Daily Show for politics at the time, and that, without being a comedian, but being entertaining and break down what are the stories of the day, what are the big environmental stories instead of the politics stories, and make that a radio show. And so we had this, in the series of bosses, probably the best one for me, maybe not the best one for everyone, because he then had the infamous job of needing to lay off a bunch of people, and then he eventually quit after that because it was not his scene. But for me, wound up being a real teacher of how to be a manager and how to work with people and how to get through times even kind of like those, which then helped me down the road, which I'll get to. And so I said, hey, what do you think about this? What do you think about this radio show? And he's like, I like it. I like this idea. I think you've got something here. It's never going to happen. It's just never going to happen. To do a radio call-in show, you need double glass pane boxes with 2 sets of microphones. You need to have people that work with you and fill in for you when you're gone. And you need to have producers that take the calls and answer the calls and weed out all the ba-ba buoys and then send them forward to you. And there has to be computer screens that show you what's going to be up next. And he's like, it's just never going to happen. But it sounds like this could be a pitch for a TV show. And NBC's here, so why don't I, in all these terrible meetings that I'm forced to be in every day about all these synergies, why don't I bring this up for you? And I'm like, yeah, sure, go for it. And then NBC, to their credit or their mistake, you pick, said, I don't really understand you, Mike. I don't have any clue what you're saying. You're not doing a good pitch. So why don't you bring in the guy that gave this pitch to you and let him try again? And so I was brought into this effectively boardroom talking to a bunch of people that if I knew who they were, I probably wouldn't have been able to make a complete sentence. There were the head of Peacock Productions, the head of NBC syndicated shows, the head of NBC Radio and Westwood One at the time, the biggest bosses of the Weather Channel, long form that was just kind of starting out at that point when they were expanding away from just storm stories and doing these other things. And I gave them this pitch, and they said, "All right, let's green light it. Let's do a pilot." And so my experience at television at this point was an internship at News 12 New Jersey, and Rutgers Television, which was a PowerPoint slide where we hit spacebar at the right time so that the next day could fly in with an effect. That was it. And then theater, which is a very different medium than television, and talking to somebody here as opposed to talking to someone there. And they said, okay. And so I'm like, okay, I don't know how to do that. And so they flew me to New York. They had me meet with the stylist that is like Jimmy Fallon's buddy, because I guess we're both lanky enough to be in the same clothing group. And they took me around New York City, and we bought a bunch of clothes on somebody else's money, and they sent it to my house with we took a bunch of photos in it, because I'm like, I'm not going to remember what you think looks good, right? I still wear the same clothes I had in middle school. And so they had a 3-ring binder, which I hope is still somewhere in my house. It probably is somewhere in a closet buried in the, oh my gosh, I can't believe this happened drawer. And they had pictures of all the outfits and how they worked or didn't work together. And so we made this pilot. I still talk to the director and producer of that pilot, who were at the Weather Channel at the time, and they focus grouped it, and it did okay. And then they kind of didn't really want to launch it. They didn't know where it should go. The show name, the working show name, was Lightning Rod. It was supposed to be kind of weather with a personality, right? Weather with a bit more opinion than you could easily get away with on the channel at the time. I think it's very different now. But, it wanted to be a little bit more in your face, right? We did these promos where, I was yelling at the camera as if it was, Jim Cramer-esque, right? Jim Cramer yells on CNBC, yells on TV. And it was kind of that. And we did a bunch of, we hired a whole staff. We brought all these people in. Again, people I shouldn't have ever been allowed to be affiliated with. Like the person that was the main producer was this wonderful lady named Marlene Seelip, who is mostly out of TV, but she wound up she was on she was a producer for Donahue, and then she was filling the spot in Chicago for when Oprah went off the air, and was making that show. And then she was helping me make this show at the Weather Channel, right? She knew how to do TV, which I did not. And so we had this whole show, and they focus grouped it, and then they focus grouped it again, and then they wanted to kind of launch it, but they launched it as a segment within Weather Center Live in the evening, which was totally jarring, and it never fit, and it shouldn't have fit, and the audience didn't get it, and the show that was on hated it because they had to stop what they were doing and toss it to basically a remote from the field, except we were in another studio in the same building. And then we did this segment that may or may not have fit with anything they were talking about that day, and then awkwardly sent it back to them. Everyone hated it collectively across the board. And they focus grouped that. And again, it did okay. And so they didn't just get rid of it. And then the biggest boss of the time left, and the new boss came in, and effectively the next day, everyone on that show was fired. My contract was written for that show. So I was brought into an office where it was me and HR and a big manager at the time, and I was fired. And then I was handed a new contract and rehired. So I can officially say I was fired from the Weather Channel. They did correct that error, I suppose, but then they made the same mistake and let me come back in. 2 of the producers were kept, and everyone else on the show team was let go.
Wow.
That day. There was a co-host that was supposed to do social media. We were really trying to do social media first on that show, kind of what ESPN Sports Nation wound up doing. We brought in all kinds of technology into the Weather Channel that they didn't have before. We had this Microsoft Surface. I don't know if anyone remembers this. Microsoft Surface, before it was a tablet, was a giant box coffee table that was in a lot of hotel lobbies, and the Weather Channel built an interactive radar map for that. And so that was going to be how we controlled the weather on days where it was busy when we were on. So we built cameras that were mounted above this thing, looking down from above, and you would see my hands moving this technology, a touchscreen. No, we didn't have any touchscreens at the Weather Channel at that point. And then eventually they went more vertical, and then everything was a touchscreen. But we brought in these, phone call polls to be able to do live trivia questions on air, and had all this stuff, and that wasn't there. We had weather, social was super important, and we had, tweets going across the screen. This is all in practice. No one ever saw it, but then it wound up going the Weather Channel. And I think it was because of that work on the social side of that show that they wound up saying, okay, he's coming up with these ideas of things that we're not doing yet. And so they kept me, and it transitioned me to be the Weather Channel Social. It was like a branded segment on the network, and that was my job when I first transitioned to more of a true Weather Channel TV person.
And they've kept you on this entire time. And yeah. I'm slightly biased since I taught you everything you know. Just kidding, totally kidding. No, but I do want to say, I've watched Mark since he's been on television now, and you've taken on so many different roles. And I want you to talk about some of those, because you've hit so many different shifts. You've worked all across the clock. And I think radio actually helped you with that, because radio is 24/7, but you've hosted shows, you've done different segments like the Weather Wizard segments and the augmented reality segments. I want you to talk about some of those. But I want to let you know, and again, I can be a little bit biased, but this is my honest opinion. You are a great teacher, and I've learned so much from watching your segments, your coverage, and I know that I'm going to get a lesson on what's actually happening, and learn more than what just is happening with the weather when I hear one of your segments or when you're doing live coverage. So I just want to give you that kudos. I'm so proud of you, and so it's neat to see how far you've come since walking in. And you're this young whippersnapper in 2004, and we're hanging out together, and we're singing karaoke together, and doing all, just being buddies.
What?
I know.
Karaoke together?
That is true.
What?
That is true.
That may come back to haunt you right there.
I like singing karaoke. So talk about some of your different roles, especially some of the Weather Wizard segments that you've done and the augmented reality stuff, but then also just you've traveled, you've been able to cover stuff, all the different hurricanes or whatever. So just let it roll with some of your favorite stuff there.
Well, first, thank you. I'll try not to get off the clumped. I don't claim to have a great pulse on the viewer at any one time, but I figure they're not watching the Weather Channel unless A, they're in some sort of danger, B, they're just really into the weather, or C, there's some sort of like weather nerd of some kind like I am. And so I figure that's who I'm talking to. I want it, like, you can get the forecast in so many different ways, but it's the why is this happening? How is this happening? It's the rest of that story that you can't get by opening up an app or opening up a phone. And so you need to have those trusted sources, right? You're going to watch James Spann, and you're going to watch the video that he posts, and you're going to learn something. And it's going to be more than just today's high is 70, right? There's so much more to that. So thank you. I try to bring more of that in. And yes, I have had every role but hosting the morning show effectively. And I kind of hope to keep it that way, at least at the Weather Channel, because it's not where the storms are. And so if I had my way, I wouldn't be first to wake up because it's not as exciting. It's maybe you could argue more fun, but not as meteorologically exciting. And so. Yeah, I started doing Weather Channel Social, and we were doing what is trending. My Twitter feed is unusable because back in the Wild West of Twitter, in order to get any tweet on air. You had to both follow each other. And so I followed everybody. And so I followed, don't ever use my Twitter list as like, oh, these are all the good names to follow. It will not go well for you. Because again, if they were on Twitter in 2004 and mentioned a weather term, chances are I followed them. And 2008 or really 10, whatever. 2010. And so I was a Weather Channel social, and then that kind of, I convinced them, along with many others, that like it shouldn't be a standalone segment, right? This needs to be part of the shows, right? This needs to be part of the story, as opposed to like, now let's see what's on Twitter today. Like that's not going to work anymore at that time, even. Certainly not now. And so then I wound up joining mostly Day Planner, I think, at the time, with Nick Walker and Vivian Brown. And so I learned a lot from them because they are, Weather Channel heroes for so many. And when Weather Channel social kind of ended, I was doing just the weekly planner, right? They wouldn't let me do anything but the weekly planner, right? That was your segment. You're doing the weekly planner. And even if one of those two, stars was out that day, they would bring in a freelancer and I would still be doing the weekly planner. And I'm like, guys, I'm right here. I've got 3 degrees. I'm pretty sure I can handle this now. And it took a long time to convince them that I could fill in on a show and then eventually host a show. I wound up hosting with Vivian for a while. And so became a show host. And then I was always pitching these other things like Weather Wizard, which is one of my favorites. And so the original pitch for Weather Wizard was to, could you open up your kitchen cabinets and somehow do a weather experiment that could then teach your kids something to make them understand what the weather was doing that day and why, or make them not as scared because they then understood it. And so I pitched that to basically the 2 remaining people from the Lightning Rod show that we're still producing, and there's still one there. And so she is often one of my go-to pitch people. Hey, is this idea worth anything? And so we made this segment called Weather Wizard, and we made a whole bunch of these experiments and filmed them in what we fondly called the Weather Wizard laboratory, because it's outside the OCM bathroom. And so we would like try to hide the coffee pot and put up a couple beakers instead and make it look like a lab set. But no, we were outside 2 bathrooms. And so we would film these experiments, and then eventually we're like, I was like, I would pitch all these and I'd write them and then we'd film them and we'd test them and blah, blah, blah. I ran out. I was like, I don't have any more things to do with food coloring and hot water. I'm out of these. And so that transitioned to, okay, well, what if the wizardry, what if the magic is because of the graphics that are changing around me? Could we augment outside, right? Could we have things pop up next to me? Could we be in a field and cover it with snow? Could we do these other things? And I finally found the right team of graphics people who are just unbelievable. This group of guys and girls, most of them have now left, unfortunately, to other amazing opportunities because they're that good. I mean, these guys are taking over 3D graphics and, name an industry, they're in it. But I had the pleasure of working with them, and they would be my graphical interface, right? I would say, okay, here's this thing I want to do. And we would sit there and we'd storyboard it. And I had stick figures, and then they were actually artists and they would make better stick figures. And then we would go out to this field and I would write this whole thing, and it would have to all be one take, and there's no scripts and there's no prompter out there. And we do this whole thing, and then they'd come back and they would make that graphic stuff happen. Like, the weight of snow was one of the titles. Like, if one snowflake is nothing, but you get enough of them, and suddenly there's these roofs caving in. And the Daily Show picked it up because the punchline was really like, was it Michael Bay, the Transformers guy? Like, when did Michael Bay start working for the Weather Channel? as like cars were falling off the roof. And, the safest room, I will show that in every school talk I go to, because I'm just so proud of that, where we walked through Maria LaRosa's house and destroyed it graphically with a tornado coming through. And like the persona at that point was like, what if you were kind of like Mayhem from that insurance commercial? And like this stuff would happen around you, but it wouldn't really affect you. And like you had this kind of nonchalant tone about all this stuff that was happening around you, and like, but it taught you where to go and where to be safe. And it just worked. And so we were, ducking through a hallway, and then a 2x4 would come through. And my favorite part of all of this is that when I duck under the 2x4, a shadow comes across me. Like, these guys thought of everything. And then I knew they were good when they started getting copied. And so a local NBC affiliate, almost shot for shot, word for word, redid The Safest Room with the NBC affiliate graphics instead of our own. And then we did this pothole explainer, and it was on nightly news with a nightly news person doing it and tweeting out. And I saved these because, again, I use them in school talks, tweeting out like, you got to tune in for my groundbreaking report on potholes. And I wrote back because again, I didn't know who I was talking to, and had I known, I probably wouldn't have. But wrote back, I'm like, wow, looks a lot like my groundbreaking piece about potholes. And then she wrote back, well, you were the inspiration. And I wrote back, I don't think you know what that means.
Sounds like Diane Sawyer, James. Cranky.
But again, it was like I knew we were onto something then, and we made a bunch of these. And those graphics people wound up getting pulled to other projects, and that was the difference between within the Weather Channel. But there's higher priorities than little old me and these little explainers. And so that was the downfall of that project, because I couldn't go to my own kitchen cabinet and make it happen. I needed these other people. And if I didn't have the graphics team to make it happen, it was dead in the water. So I have these, a couple more, probably 2 or 3 scripts that I've written and were approved and are ready. And at some point I'll repitch it again with a new graphics team and a new person that might say yes to it, but they're just waiting. They're waiting for the next one. But yeah, I love doing those. Yeah. And Dobbins is flying by again. So if you say anything now, I won't hear you.
Again, I feel you very, very much. I love the nightly flyovers by very large military equipment. It just it keeps it local, keeps it homey. So I really enjoyed all of that, and I'm really interested in picking up a thread that you actually tossed out at the very beginning, where you said you were really interested in climate and climate communication. And you've talked a lot about, you've created such amazing materials that others have gone on to perhaps co-opt. There are programs now that are trying to feed materials to broadcasters, like Climate Central. There's a Climate Matters program that has been spearheaded by a lot of really great scientists, including social scientists. And they're looking to try to leverage people like you with real interest in this area and a lot of storytelling potential to talk about things like climate. And if our listeners are tuned into climate news, they might have heard that today there was an IPCC report that was heavily publicized, talked about where the science is really pointing to, this is a topic we should be talking about. Everyone is very tired, I think, right now with the pandemic and everything they've been through, but there's never been a more important time to tell stories about something like this. And I'm curious to know, have you connected with programs like that? And how is it that you talk about things like climate?
Yeah, I love Climate Central. I applied to work there at one point, and we were on different kind of views of the size of the role, I guess is the best way to put it, both for the amount of work, like was it be under people or running people, right? Well, and the amount of salary it would take to move back to central New Jersey, which is an order of magnitude or more different than where I am now. And so it didn't work out, but I love them, right? I love all the people at Climate Central, and the Weather Channel is a big partner of Climate Central. So we use all their graphics. We have there's a new platform, but kind of brand within the platforms called Pattern, and some of the Climate Central at the Weather Channel basically doing climate storytelling, and they have an advisory board, and some of the people from Climate Central are then on the advisory board of Pattern. So like they're all synced up, and it's awesome, right? Because it's again giving these opportunities to meet with people in the room that you never thought you would be able to talk to, and have these real great brainstorming opportunities and storytelling opportunities, and like I was trying to do some of those climate stories, even with the original Weather Wizards. I baked a totally unedible, gross, purposefully cupcake that was one of the rainbow cupcakes, right? It was all stacked together, and I coated it with white frosting. And so if parents are watching, you can do this and you can make it delicious. I did not. I just needed to get it done. And so it was all stacked with different colors and baked, looked like a cupcake covered in white as snow. It said, "This is an ice core." And I took a straw and I went through the top and I pulled it out, and you could see all the different layers of color. And because who understands what an ice core is? It doesn't make any sense. Like, why can you tell the age of the ice? And how does that happen? And why does it come out just because you stick a metal straw through it? And I'm like, well, this is effectively the same thing. And so it was just, how could you open up your kitchen cabinets and teach a climate story?
Yeah.
And so that was one of them. But again, because the Weather Channel is such a name, such a brand, I just had this great chance to go up to Boston for it's a Harvard conference, the T.H. Chan Public Policy School, or Environmental Health, Public Health, and T.H. Chan Public Health. And so they do this. They're doing this conference for high school students. I was like, oh my gosh, I would kill to have been a high school student in this room, because they have these week-long conferences, and we were brought in, myself and Paul Parker, to do for anyone that was really interested. They broke into sub-teams, and this was the communications and public policy and kind of how that intertwined with each other focus group. And we got to do a little, presentation, and then meet with them much more informally and talk to all these high school students. We did like an Ask Me Anything session and just answer anything they wanted to know about climate or weather or broadcast or our life history, and just sit and chill. And, it is the youth movement for climate that's going to fix this. Unfortunately, all us old people are like, I created this problem for you. Bye. Good luck. Hope you have fun fixing the world for us. But they're taking that. They're like, okay, I guess this is what we're doing. Those students are just absolute powerhouses. That was a real joy to be in the room, right? And so those things are happening. We're really trying to bring up the climate storytelling through Pattern, which then shows up on the Weather Channel, but then it's also on all these other things. So that's a real opportunity for people to learn and see more.
So Mark, we're so politicized and so polarized. How do you have a conversation with someone who may not feel the same way you do or agree with you when it comes to climate change? What's your your go-to talking points? Yeah,
so it's all about knowing your audience. I've been in some pretty hostile rooms before, where I was the far minority that gave two whats about climate at all, and who didn't think that it was just a scam and we were being paid off by someone, which I'd be a lot richer if that were the case, I think. But so I usually start those with talking about my kids, because it's real hard to come back at somebody after, like, I'm doing all this work because I'm just trying to leave the world safer for my kids. And nobody then goes, God, I hate kids. How dare you try to help your kids? That's terrible, right? Like, it's a real, it's a much harder start to the fight when you bring up people that are 6 years age, 6 years or under, right? It's much harder to fight them. They're cuter than me. And then the second line from that is often, like I was a Boy Scout once. There's the whole like leave the place that you're camping better than you found it. It's not just about clean up your trash. It's about find the other trash that's nearby. And just because you can't see the trash, know that we're putting something into the air. And the question is, should we be? If there's better ways to do it, if there's new technology, if there's ways to clean it up, should we just keep doing it because we can? And that usually makes people question a little bit more, because it's looking at it as a piece of trash in a river. You wouldn't just let the piece of trash in the river float by if you were a Boy Scout in a canoe. You would pick it up and you would put it in the canoe with you. It was just what you did. And so that's just what we do, right? If you have a chance to, use an electric car charged by a solar panel instead of a combustion engine, you do it. And if you have a chance to take out some of that carbon, even if it's not as tangible, you can't see it floating down the river, but it is still in the river. If you have a chance to take it out, you try to. And so I think that approach has worked really well. The other approach that I use is to talk about things that the room cares about. As an example, I was in I've done some talks in, local business group, finance driven. And so you talk about the financial risk of weather and climate and how that affects business and how business decisions of the past, redlining as an example, affect current risk of extreme weather and climate now. And so that really reaches the root. And I've talked into some religious groups, and religion and science don't have a great long history together. They don't always get along. But what most religions have is a real moral compass. They don't speak to science, but they speak to morals and just and what's right. And so I approach the climate story to that room as a social and moral justice, environmental justice issue, where the poorest nations and the poorest people in rich nations are affected more and worse and harder and with less recovery ability than you and me in this room. And suddenly they're like, oh, we're making sandwiches and driving down to downtown Atlanta, but we're not thinking about how it's completely paved over and no one has flood insurance, and yet they flood at such a higher risk and the temperatures are so much higher. Somehow talking in that way, right? The moral issues of who is this really affecting is a totally different topic. I don't have to bring up climate change. I never say global warming in those rooms. I talk about what is happening to their interests. And that is, it's just a totally different conversation. And then everyone goes, their guard comes way down. And then at the end of it, they're asking, well, how do we fix it? And every once in a while, I end with, you vote for people that will also help vote to fix it. And that is the only politics that comes up. But it's true, right? If you want something on a grand scale to change, you vote for the people that can make that grand scale happen. And then you pressure the people that are there to vote for your interest. And if your interest is protecting the weak and looking out for the weaker party than yourself, or for loving the stranger, or for helping the immigrant, and if the immigrant happens to be a climate refugee, you're speaking a totally different language to them suddenly, and the room is open at that point, as opposed to the fight that they were prepared for.
I was looking at your Facebook page, and you just a couple of days ago, you had the hashtag Waste No Water Challenge, and you did the example from your garden. Yeah. So talk about that and other ways that you personally, because you practice what you preach, you are a wonderful example. And so talk about that and other things that you've done to help environmental causes.
Yeah, so the Weather Channel's doing this, the hashtag Waste No Water, and it's because there's so much drought right now, maybe more so than ever before, especially if you're anywhere west of the Mississippi. It's really extreme. The stuff we're seeing is extreme. Lake Oroville is just ridiculous. And that's not necessarily a new story, right? There's a long history of ups and downs across the West, but this one feels a little bit different. Certainly the Pacific Northwest into Southwest Canada earlier this summer felt a lot different. And so to do something in kind of an awareness campaign, the Olympics were happening, and how do we talk about this in a different way that might make somebody notice? The Weather Channel is doing this bracket of can the on-camera people lower their water use and move on in the bracket by certain percentages, and can we create some learning opportunities through that challenge on social media, which then go on air occasionally throughout the day as well. And so first, in full disclosure, I've already been eliminated from the bracket. And part of that, I hope, and I think Jackie, who is up against me, will agree, that I just don't have that much water use to cut out at this point. And so, because it was by a percent saved, not a total low number of water use. And so I have, I'm fortunate, I have a pretty large green lawn, and I've built all of these flower beds and vegetable beds. And by doing so, I've cut out all of the shipping of vegetables to my house and to the grocery store. And it's great. Like, my kids are super involved. They're little farmers. They love to go out and pick everything. And so they know where food comes from. And there's all this really important stuff that happens by having a garden. But I've changed the water of my house so much that we have an irrigation system, right? We have sprinklers on this lawn. I've never turned them on because I took all my downspouts and turned them into these, they go underground, and then they have these kind of pop-up drains, and the water from the rain from my roof spreads out over the rest of my lawn. And so every time it rains, it not only gets some of the rain from the rainfall, but then it also slowly percolates from the gutter system over the next couple of days as it drains out through this thing. And then I have rain barrels, and I use old school watering cans, and occasionally hook up a hose on the bottom of it. And we use that to water the raised beds. And so I have almost no outside water use at this point because it never stops raining in the South. It would be, I guess, a slightly different equation if we went into a drought across the South, and I would have to use some water from the hose for the vegetables, but I would probably just let the grass go, and I would turn it into more farm later if it really died and didn't come back. But I've planted, local grasses and drought-tolerant plants, and there's shade where there needs to be, and there's sun where there needs to be, and everything kind of works in harmony, and the bugs and the bees, birds all love it, and it's a little, party in the yard, which again, the kids love, which was, I think, the original motivation. And then as the added bonus, it became very environmental. And then, we were all home for a year, as I mentioned earlier in this, and instead of paying for 2 daycares, we were paying for none. And suddenly we were rich, because if you ever paid for 2 daycares at the same time, you know how unbelievably expensive it is. And so we made the conscious choice to say, okay, we are going to use that money towards something that we thought was going to happen several years down the line, and we put solar panels on my roof. And so now, for a year, about 80% of my energy use for the house is from solar. It's done here, and there are full months where it's totally in my favor. I think my March energy bill was $6.
Wow.
And if I've got a house that has a basement, it has 2 floors, it's got several bedrooms. Like, it's a decent sized suburb house, right? It's it's not nothing. And to have a $6 energy bill is
get your
attention, right?
Yeah.
And so
absolutely,
it's going to take a lot of those $6 energy bills to make up the upfront cost of the solar panels. But partially because of COVID and partially because it's something I was working towards, we were able to do it. And I drive an electric car, so now my car is powered by the sun, which is nice to think about, right? I'm effectively putting zero CO2 into the air by driving around. And that's, again, that was a purposeful choice to put the money where the mouth is. It is, none of that was cheap. None of it is necessarily available to everyone, but it was available to me, so I did.
So we put our money on Jackie Jarris in the pool to see who's going to win the bracket. Mark.
I hope so. I'm gonna. She said I have to tutor her and do some of the stuff. It's so much. Like, I learned a lot from this. So much of your water use, and there's some calculators out there online. So much of your day-to-day water use is because of all the other stuff that's not turning on your faucet. What you eat is a huge part of it. I found out my dogs are probably the biggest water users of my house because they drink a lot. They love mud, and they have baths more than I do, and probably more than anyone else in the house does. And as it turns out, food, what you eat, is super crucial to your water use. Because if you're feeding an animal and watering that animal and then turning that animal into other food and shipping it across the country, and that takes water use for the power plants and all this stuff, the water use is just totally skyrockets if you're a meat eater. Well, you can't have vegetarian dogs. It's really bad for them, right? And so this calculator was like, how much on average do you spend on dog food a month? And I was like, that's a significant bag, right? It's probably $60, maybe $70. And suddenly my water use calculator was like, oh no. Because I've eliminated a lot of meat from my diet for both health reasons and environmental reasons. And so, I'm not a vegetarian, but I eat a lot of vegetarian throughout the week. And I think my dogs use more water than I do at this point. It was incredible to find out.
So Mark, own up. Was it the 1971 Partridge Family episode where the family had to conserve electricity and Danny read the meter wrong that led to this challenge, or is that too far?
You're predating me. I admitted I was born in the 80s. So, but the bosses may have seen it, and so maybe that's their inspiration. I don't know.
Could be. You just go back and find that episode.
Maybe I should go back.
Yeah.
Well, this is so fun tonight, and we're really enjoying this. There's still a lot to get to. I wanted to ask you, though, about Nicholas Wiltgen and what happened to him and the lessons that are there for meteorologists that might be, having difficult times out there. Speak to that for a moment, because I know you were very close with him.
Yeah, Nick was my buddy, right? We would hang out. We'd go to soccer matches together. We'd done road trips together. We had some really great moments. He was in the radio, and then he had transitioned to the .com side and was, really just his brain was unreal. He would make weather connections stories that were totally relevant and totally amazing and needed, and nobody else it had not come out of their mouths yet. Right? It hadn't wrinkled their brain even a little. And he's like, well, what about this? And suddenly the whole day would change. He learned Japanese because he wanted to by watching Japanese news broadcasts. He would just sit there and watch them, and he picked up Japanese. That's the kind of brain that Nick was. To talk about that as a loss is an understatement of the century. We, as these things tend to be, still don't know the whole story, right? Potentially and probably likely because of a breakup, but no one in his friend group knew that he was suffering at all. And we all took that pretty hard. None of us knew. None of us had even a hint. Right? There was not really looking like, after, oh, well, looking back, he was the loner. He was his clothing had changed, or how he was answering, the phone changed. Nothing. None of us could look back and say, oh, this was something that we could have done something about. But he was obviously really suffering, or he wouldn't have gotten to that point, that he took his own life. And so after that, the group, I don't know, we found out that that's not as rare as it should be in the meteorology community. That, there's a lot of tough times when you're starting out in the weather business. You're often, especially in TV meteorology, starting out in a very small market in a town far, far away where you know almost nobody and you don't have the same accent. And you're looked at as an outsider, and you're struggling because you're not paid enough. You're trying to pick up new skills and new jobs. And so, like, if you go through I'm not an expert at this. Kim probably can answer more of this than I can. But like, if you're like looking at the long list of giant stressors in your life, new job, moving, financial issues. You're piling all those on at once. And often, because, you're getting hired on it for TV, you're reasonably personable. Maybe there's a relationship. Maybe you're leaving a relationship. Maybe you're trying to make a relationship move with you. None of that is easy. And so there's these young, brilliant, important meteorology people that are struggling, sometimes silently and sometimes not. And sometimes it should just be obvious that we're putting them in this position, and they should be struggling, even if they're not. Something that I learned from Jim Cantori, and is that if somebody takes the time, writes you anything on Twitter, try to answer them in some way. James Spann is pro at this, right? Like, I don't know how this guy's got enough time in his day to do what he does. But if somebody writes to you, the heart key, the like symbol goes further than you would know if you were really struggling and you felt that nobody was here. You're tweeting into the void, and suddenly somebody that's on a national network put the heart symbol up. That can be huge. And then if you then have the ability, if there's an actual question, if there's something that's written to you and you write back, had people that I've written to over the years in meteorology or whatever, all written back, gosh, that would have been, I don't know what I would have done with myself as a kid, and then if you're really struggling at the time and somebody spends that, you don't know how you're going to affect somebody in that way. And so again, Jim and watching people like James, I try to emulate that, hoping that maybe it's the right message at the right time, because I don't know these people. I don't know every small market. I can't reach out on my own all the time, but like, I just, from what happened to Nick, that little voice never quite leaves. And so it kind of forms how I go about talking back on social media, if nothing else. A lot of other things too, but certainly that.
Well, this has been an amazing 90 minutes, and we're going to transition in just a second, but I wanted anybody else to ask anything they wanted to ask. I just wanted to ask you, Mark, most memorable storm, most memorable story, any other most memorables?
Oh, man. As a kid, Blizzard of 96 was very, was earth-shattering to me of what weather can do. It happened at the end of winter holidays, and then we were out of school for like 2 more weeks because our town was just shut down. There's some pictures of me next to snow piles that are 3-4 times my height. And so in North Jersey, that happened again more recently with one of the couple of years ago blizzard storms that was just incredible, with the new records outside of in New York City. I don't know if it in my town, Blizzard of 96 may have still taken it, but I was out of school forever. The other one, Jen, you probably remember. We were in radio during Katrina, and we had WWL, the emergency broadcast station, as one of the radio clients at the time. And I had the the honor, I'll say with a question mark at the end, of being on the radio the night before landfall, as the cone was just starting to shift slightly away from New Orleans. And so the mayor at the time did an interview, and it was, just it was either the night before or maybe 2 nights before. That cone was just starting to shift east a little bit at that time. So I could go back and figure it out, but whatever the case. He went on and said, I am not ordering evacuations. The cone is going to the right and we're going to be fine. And there's no need to evacuate. And you people are all creating panic by even asking the question. It was really a contentious kind of interview on the radio. And so the mayor's done saying, don't evacuate. And then almost the next sentence out of the host is like, now from the Weather Channel, Mark, what do you think about that? And so I had, at that point, the mayor had taken up all the time. There's, I'm on sound bites, right? They're going to use only so much of this, and people are, if they're still listening, only have a bandwidth of so much time left. And I basically said, mayor's not really correct in the weather science, right? The cone moving does not mean that you're out of the risk of the impacts, and that you're still in the cone at this point, right? And so even if you don't flood from the front, there's still a very good chance you're going to flood from the back. And so I said, if you're in one of the many flood-prone areas and you're able to leave, think about leaving. Right after the mayor said, don't evacuate. And then I woke up, and so I mentioned Andrew Durante earlier, who's, again, a buddy of mine from school, and he happened to be, because, it was streaming, right? WL was streaming, and he knew I was going to be on. He was listening. How could you not, right? That night, we were all either watching or listening, or we were all like ingesting everything we could. New Orleans. And he was listening, and he sent me this text. I don't know, man. Honestly, you sounded a little panicked. I don't like your tone might not have been right. And he knew a lot about broadcast meteorology. He was really one of our core group of communicators starting up that RUTV Weather Watcher stuff at the time. I respected his opinion. You're right. Let me think about how I'm saying stuff, and let me pick the words. And it was basically the end of my shift. There was nothing I could do about it then. And then the flood happened, and the next text was you're the good tone that night. That was a really smart panic tone you used. You should try that again next time. So that's one I'll remember for a long time.
All right, Mark. So give us some encouragement here. Where's this business going? What will this look like in 20 years? Will there be local broadcast meteorologists? Will there be a weather channel? What's your vision for the future for the younger people that want to get in this business?
Yeah, remember when radio was dead? I heard that before I started in radio. There's still a place for radio. There's still a place for people to talk on, with microphones in front of their face. We're doing it now. It's live on a different forum, but it's still live. And, all these electric cars can pick up just about anything you want them to. Radio still exists. I think TV is always going to exist. And I think local meteorology within that is the safest part of all of this. I think that there's always going to be a need for local news. And and people that know the area and follow the stories, and even as decimated as newsrooms have become, the ones that are still going and still do it right and are such a huge asset. And they'll always be there in some way. And if they're always there, there's going to always be local weather. And with the weather being as crazy as it's been recently, you could make the argument that people that can talk about this science are more relevant and more needed than ever before. I think the question is, do they keep getting paid as much as they've been paid in the past? And probably not, at least for the upper echelon, right? There's going to be maybe even more of a split between those who really make a great living at this and a whole bunch of people that do fine and are passionate and love it, and that's going to be enough. But if there's too much of that other end of the spectrum, we go back to our conversation from before of if you're really struggling and you're in this new place and that's a huge stress for you, there is going to be a mental health side of that as well. And there's already a mental health side of climate. As for the Weather Channel, I hope so, both because it's my current employer and because I really love it so, right? I mean, I have this place in my being for the Weather Channel, whether I'm on it forever or not. I think I'm always going to be one that's watching the Weather Channel, just because it's in my DNA at this point. So much of who I am.
Who owns the Weather Channel now? We had the split where IBM and the weather company, they got the digital side. Who owns
Mommy
the
and
TV
Daddy
side?
Are fighting.
Yeah.
So Byron Allen and Entertainment Studios owns the Weather Channel television network, and he also owns a lot of local stations. That Entertainment Studios owns a lot of local stations around the country. So there is a kind of a synergy of this big national weather brand and some smaller local markets that may not have been able to do the kind of things without the support of a big name or some of the help, the way that newsrooms have gone. I'm hopeful that there's a way forward on both sides because of that. Again, mostly because I'm super biased.
So you got a high school kid watching this. They want to be you when they're in their 30s. They want to be on the Weather Channel. So lay some advice on a high school senior that wants to do what you do.
Yeah, I get that question a lot. And my answer is first, in high school and then into college, really try to understand the weather, right? Take as much physics and math as you can stomach. Because if you can get past that and really understand it, and you're still willing to talk about it at the end, you'll find a spot. You'll find a place where you can keep talking about it and tell those stories. The follow-up to that is to, especially while you're young, if you have that kind of backup ability, say yes. Say yes to the internship. Say yes to the crazy job that's supposed to end in a few days. Say yes to talking to the people that you should have no business talking to. Say yes to making something new that may be copied by somebody else down the line, right? Just keep saying yes, because at some point, when it fails and you crash and burn and everyone gets fired, it may be the best mistake that happens, right? And if you're young and it really does crash and burn, you got the rest of your career to figure out something else to do. And so those high school students and those people coming right out of college, go for it, right? If you've done all those classes and you still like it and you still say that's what you want to do, you're going to find a way to do it. So say yes to it.
Awesome. Well, listen, we have to take a time out here. Aubrey, by chance, do you have a second to do a little email?
I do.
Okay. Well, if that's the case, then let's just stop for a minute and dive into the good old email inbox to see if anything happens to be in there.
Letters. We get letters. We get stacks and stacks of letters.
All right, the first one comes in from Nate Larson. I came across a video from my local TV station's weather app in Fargo, North Dakota, Moorhead, Minnesota on Saturday. I heard there was, I believe you're looking for a mesoscale convective system, Nate, that was south of Bismarck, North Dakota, near the state line. Also kind of was watching it for a couple of hours, never seen anything like that nearby, because if a hurricane came from the south and tried to make it up to the Fargo area, it would have weakened. So yes, maybe that's kind of what it looked like on radar at that time, but kind of interesting on radar. So yes, the MCSs are quite common. Basically on air, I kind of call them big clusters of thunderstorms. It's kind of the unofficial term. Let's see. The next one, we had a very long one coming in from Catherine. Catherine, we appreciate all your suggestions and some good information in there. I really miss Brian Peters, Kevin Selly, and Dr. John Scala. We miss them all too. So thank you for your email. Lon Curtis had sent us some information on the August 2nd, 1985 Delta crash at DFW. So thank you for sending in that information. Tyler Harris, Question: what are the WeatherBrain episodes that center around the 1974 super outbreak? I'd love to listen to the ones you mentioned on last week's podcast. This is going back to July. Do we have that list?
Yes, Aubrey. It actually is my pick of the week for last week, and it got added after the show notes were originally posted. So if you looked at the show notes early, you didn't see that. So if you go back now, though, and thanks to these two notes, we did get those posted up there. There's 4 links, and you'll really enjoy those shows.
Perfect. And there you go, Tyler. Also, I don't believe we've gotten to this one from back in July. Question for Stan or Jen. I took a look at this article from 9 News in Tampa, Florida, that said the 1974 Gin tornado was moving at 100 miles an hour. Is that true?
Guin tornado.
Right.
G-U-I-N?
G-U-I-N, Guin, which is a little community. It was hit by a horrible EF or an F5. Jen, I don't believe that was the case.
No.
The radar operators calculated that and thought that's how fast it was going, and it may have appeared to them.
Yeah, I think it was. I think Nick told me it was more 60 to 65 miles per hour is what that was.
Which is still.
I could not find. I know, James, at some point we had at least one of those radar operators on the show, and I could not find it going back through the archives. It was either. What was Mr. Black's first name? Dale Black or Ed Landry, I think, were the 2 radar operators. And I think John Brasher may have been a part of it. But I couldn't find that show. So maybe someone out there has, and maybe I dreamed it up, but I'm almost certain we had Dale Black on the show one time.
There was an event back, and I want to say it's 77, 78, and somewhere in my stuff, wherever my stuff is, I have a tornado warning, I believe, issued by the weather office in Huntsville, Alabama, where they actually had a tornado with a forward speed of 110. I think it's moving from northern Alabama. Yeah, I have a tornado warning that was actually issued from the weather wire that I saved from about sometime 77, 78, but there was a apparent thunderstorm, and they were downranging it so far that Nashville was having to issue warnings for it at about the time this warning came out of Huntsville. Moving into southern Tennessee. So, yeah, there have been some cases, but I didn't recall that with the 74 outbreak.
Yeah, we actually read that warning on one of those shows where we went back and dramatized all the warnings from that night. And that's one of the ones that's in there.
Yeah.
All right. And just because I just saw this on Twitter, and then I'll wrap up with the email address, the National Weather Service in Bismarck, they had a storm report from a viewer that the hailstone was wider than a pack of Marlboro 100s.
That's awesome.
It reminds me of the McDonald's sauce packet hail size from.
And yet somehow still better than teacup.
Yeah. You have an email for us, or maybe a wild storm report. We love to hear from you. Email at weatherbrains.com. Love to hear your questions, links, cool stuff, suggestions. Or if you happen to be a savant with a show and you know where that show is that we're looking for, go ahead and send us an email. Email at weatherbrains.com.
All right, so let's take a break here for Tony Rice. We got the Perseid meteor shower going on this week. We got his astronomy report. We've got Jen's This Week in Tornado History. We'll come back with the Weather Roundup, Picks of the Week, and much more as Weather Brains rolls along.
Looking beyond the atmosphere, here's Tony Rice with your Astronomy Outlook.
The Olympics concluded in Tokyo yesterday, and as usual, one of the last events was the marathon. The event is based on a story of a lone runner who ran 26 miles from Marathon to Athens to bring news of a Greek victory over the Persians. Historians are pretty much in agreement that this happened in 490 BC, but exactly when was debated until the 1800s, when a German scholar and his astronomer friend used descriptions of the battle and the phases of the moon at the time to place the end of the battle and the beginning of that run on September 12, 490 BC. Prior to the 2004 games in Athens, a Texas State University astrophysicist took another look at the writings and found a problem. They'd used the wrong calendar. While the Greeks and the Spartans both used lunar calendars, one begins on the first full moon after the summer solstice, and the other after the autumnal equinox. An additional full moon fell between those two dates that year, and this shifted their calculations off by a month. So the new date for the run from Marathon was now August 12th, 490 BC. What does this have to do with weather and climate? Quite a bit, actually. One of the biggest problems that historians, and anybody else for that matter, has had with this story is that this marathon runner supposedly dropped dead after delivering his message. How then do hundreds of thousands of people manage to do this without incident today? Especially when in September, the high temperatures in Greece are in the low 80s. But August there is a whole different story. A quick glance at the forecast from the Hellenic National Meteorological Service, one of the coolest names for a weather bureau, by the way, shows tomorrow's forecasted high of 39 centigrade, or 102 Fahrenheit. Even the best runners can succumb to heat stroke, even fatally, in that kind of heat. So remember to hydrate, exercise in the cooler evening hours, and if you can't date your history, be sure to mention the moon phase and let the astronomers figure out the rest. That's your Astronomy Outlook. Follow me at RTP Hokie for more spacey stuff like this.
This week in tornado history, August 11th, 1999 is a day that many in Utah will never forget. One of the most damaging tornadoes in state history descended upon downtown Salt Lake City, tragically killing one person and injuring 80 others. The tornado carved a path of destruction 4.3 miles long through the heart of Salt Lake City, causing over $150 million in damages to the state capitol and surrounding neighborhoods. This widely visible tornado was rated F2 and became a stark reminder of the unique meteorological setups that can occur along the Wasatch Front. The tornado formed at 12:41 p.m. Mountain Time in the Poplar Grove neighborhood, just over 2 miles west-southwest of downtown. Customers and employees hid in the walk-in cooler at Club Axis as the building collapsed around them. They were uninjured. It caused widespread roof and window damage at the Delta Center, and a parking sign from the center was found 2 miles away in the front yard of a home in the Avenues neighborhood. The Outdoor Retailers Convention was being set up and had erected massive steel-framed canvas tents in a parking lot just north of the Wyndham Hotel. The tornado leveled one of the tents there, and sadly a man from Las Vegas, 38-year-old Alan Crandy, was killed when the tent was destroyed. This was also where many of the injuries occurred. Pieces of the canopy and metal beams from the tent were scattered for blocks. We have more details about this historic event on our website at tornadotalk.com. And in our podcast today's, we actually covered this story, and you can check out all of our archive podcasts on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Tornado Talk.
Thank you, Jan. So we're doing the show here on August the 9th, 2021. Time for a quick weather roundup. A little action in the tropics. We have potential tropical cyclone number 6. Troy will make you the tropical expert tonight. But can this thing survive Hispaniola?
It seems like that, based on what we're seeing, and I'm not a tropical expert, but it seems like what we're seeing is the Atlantic is finally waking up as we kind of made the change in the phases now. And so, I mean, if you go and look at the National Hurricane Center forecast track with this potential system, there's a lot of red in there. It covers a pretty wide area. I think a lot of folks need to be watching this from, the northeastern and northern part of the Caribbean, state of Florida. Let's keep an eye on it there, Cuba, and places like that. But I have this feeling, based on the people that are a hell of a lot smarter than I am, that the Atlantic is fixing to wake up. It is within days. It's really going to wake up, and I think this is the first sign of that. So did that sound halfway intelligent?
That's not bad. Mark, what say you? Can this thing survive the land interaction?
Yeah.
Yeah, that is its biggest headwind, right? The shear is reasonably low, even when it was not even yet the potential tropical cyclone from before the 5 o'clock advisory time. All of a sudden, the outflow channels opened up. The whole thing started spinning, right? It had that look. And sometimes that's enough to give you a little clue that it's going to fight off a lot of the other headwinds in the way. We've seen this already this season where a storm came through the Northern Islands. We're like, okay, well, Hispaniola's there. The mountainous terrain of Cuba is there. We've done this already. And so sometimes the atmosphere gives you these little clues that, we might be able to kind of dance around the islands and still have something that approaches is.
And you know, Mark, one thing too is dancing around the island. I think what you said is good because the geography of that area, Kim, is so unique. It depends on exactly where that track is, because there's some pretty formidable areas there where, you know, if it crosses those areas, it can disrupt flow. While it doesn't seem like sometimes it has to be that much further away, and this system then keeps on going, like Mark says. So I think it's going to be something interesting to watch. I noticed today that our office down at New Braunfels here in South Central Texas said there appears to be no threat to the northwest Gulf of Mexico at this time. I like that, and we keep on moving here. It finally got dry here. After a very wet summer, it finally has dried out. We got up to 99 today out at Camp Mabry, which is our in-city ASOS climate site. I think 95 or 96 out at Bergstrom. So I'm happy that it's dry here for a change after a couple of months of rather wet weather.
All right, Bill, I'm going to let you take it because I have to go in the phone booth, change clothes, and go into Studio A. It's that time of the evening.
Well, that's I just saw the advisory pop up, and it's still a PTC. I think is what I saw on that on one of the chat messages, probably from Miami. At least that's forecast advisory here. Yeah, here comes the public advisory now, and it still is PTC 6, and that's where it's at. So yeah, I noticed that one ensemble member on the European that's bringing it right into Houston. So. That may.
Oh, thanks.
Sorry about that.
I mean, you knew that as soon as it was in a text discussion that now the Gulf is going to be at least a possibility. As soon as it's eliminated in a text discussion, like why would you? Don't make a forecast you don't have to make.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly. Yep.
Exactly.
Yeah, and Mark, I was remembering back to that Saturday night before Katrina, because Brian Peters and I were going to the coast, and I remember listening to the mayor on the radio on WWL and thinking, and I penned a blog that night that's still out there that I think was so prescient because, how in the world could you not order a mandatory evacuation, knowing what you knew and knowing later what he knew?
Yeah.
It just was. It was irresponsible at best and negligent at
yeah.
work.
I'm looking at the TCD, which just rolled in on the weather wire here, and they said by the weekend, this is National Hurricane Center. Remember the interoffice discussion, intergovernmental discussion.
Oh yeah, I love those.
By the weekend, most of the models show depression reaching a weakness in the ridge, causing a gradual turn to the right near the Florida Keys or southern Florida. Models are in quite good agreement, especially next 3 or 4 days, but users are reminded that the average track errors at 4 and 5 days are about 175 to 200 miles. So there you go.
Absolutely. So yeah, pretty amazing.
Yep.
Anything else we need to ask Mark while we got him here? This has been a great show tonight.
Oh, thanks
so
for being
much.
Here, Mark.
Yeah, it's wonderful.
My pleasure, guys. I'm glad to have gotten the ask and be here, and it's really a thrill.
So this is the part of the show each week, Mark, where we do picks of the week. And so we'll come to you last. I'm sure you've got a million up your sleeve that you can share with us. But I'll start around the room with Jen Nairmore. Jen, what's your pick of the week?
So I saw a tweet today from the National Weather Service in New Orleans that KLIX radar is moving.
Yeah.
So I thought that was big news. And it looks like it'll be at the end of 2022. The radar will be moving west of Hammond, Louisiana. And there's a couple of good things here. More coverage, especially near the Baton Rouge area. And the lowest elevation angle of the radar is going to be coming down too. So that should help with microbursts and also for tornado formation as well in that area. So, but especially they really highlighted in their article here how that's going to help with Baton Rouge metro area. So that is my pick. So the tweet will take you to the link of the article on their website.
I also think their graphics were pretty fantastic. Also, it wasn't just information, it was literally showing you the difference, which was fantastic.
Yep, agreed.
Yeah, there's some great NWS infographics that come out of some of these offices for sure. That's really outstanding. Great pick, in. And Troy Kimmel, I'll throw it. Yeah, see, you're still in the homeless suites there. So
yeah, still in the homeless suites. And it's not things at the house aren't going as well as I'd like them to. So we're just we're going to see. We're going to see how it ends up going. My pick of the week is actually something I was using in class today up at the university. And again, my hat's off because he has so much cool stuff. Daryl Hertzman at the Iowa Environmental Mesonet. Folks, if you haven't seen, and the Texas Environmental, the environmental folks in Texas State Agency had originally one of these sites where they had wind roses available, and they dropped theirs. And I don't know if y'all have seen Daryl's site or not with the wind roses, and that's my pick of the week. It is amazing, and it's easy off the web address to just plug in what set of ASOSs it is or AWASs that has that web address, and I put in TX in mine, and then I put AUS, and you can see the wind roses. And he does it not only on an annual basis, but he does it also on a monthly basis. And it is a great resource that I'd be damned if I could be able to find anywhere else. So thank you, Daryl, for doing that for us.
Yeah, Daryl has resulted in some great inspiration for your picks of the week, Troy.
He has. He absolutely.
The only problem is they're tremendous time sinks. That's the only problem. Aubrey, I know you got to go soon. What you got for us?
All right, so I changed my pick of the week because earlier tonight I was thinking, I don't have anything. Idiot. Yes, I do. So mine is actually from my hometown of Wallingford, Connecticut. Bonus points if you know where Wallingford is. It is very close to New Haven, where Yale is. August 9th, 1878, an F4 tornado in Connecticut. This killed more than 30 people. And where this tornado, it was actually very fascinating reading the history reports of how this started. It started as a water spout on this lake. And let me tell you about this lake. This lake is like super tiny. It is not a typical, it's a small park and rec lake. You could see from one end to the other. It is a very small lake. So it's more like an enlarged pond. So I think that's kind of fascinating of where it started, which is about 2 miles from where I grew up. It went through almost right in the heart of downtown, but it did cross over Main Street, basically close to the area where I learned to swim at the community pool. So fascinating. It is the second deadliest tornado in New England history. And Jennifer, correct me if I'm wrong, that would be 1954, Worcester.
53.
53, okay.
Yeah, Worcester, you're right. And Wallingford is on our ever-growing list of tornado talk summaries that we want to write. That's on the list that I'd like to tackle. So I'll keep you posted on that.
Sounds good.
Awesome pick. Thank you, Aubrey.
You bet.
Dr. Kim Cloco-McLean, I'll go to you. So glad you're here tonight. We got a piece of business to cover, too, after you give your pick of the week.
All right. So my pick of the week is the IPCC assessment report that just came out today. Mm-hmm. And this is something that, for those who aren't familiar with IPCC parlance, this is one of those reports that's a really big report that comes out only every couple of years. And so this is a really big update. And it makes for some heavy reading. It's heavy even in good times, and I know it's going to be heavy in the current times, but it's something that I think people should take a look at. And I love, Mark, what you were talking about earlier, where it's really just thinking about, our children. I've been talking with friends and family about these issues, an array of people who have a very, wide spectrum of beliefs. And I just say, what do you want my children to remember of what you thought and what you stood for and what you fought for at this time when things could really matter? Because that's one of the things that the IPCC report covers is we have a very important window in the next couple of years to try to tackle the issue. And it's a bet you're making. If you bet that all of it is hooey and you don't care how you're remembered, for whatever, that's a bet you want to make. But think about, what if you're wrong, and what your grandchildren will think of the choices that you made today. So just I think it's a really approachable way to think about it, the next generation and what we're putting on them, and read that report.
Yeah, that's truly outstanding, and something we've been thinking about for a long, long time. And what got my attention very early on was listening to an admiral in the Navy speaking at an NWA meeting, and the amount of resources they were putting into what they were going to have to do in the Hampton Roads for what was coming down the road. And this was 12, 14 years ago. That really woke me up, because the military a lot of times is ahead on a lot of things that we see later. And it had his attention for sure. But thank you for that, Kim. And the other question you don't have to say now, and I guess I'm kind of putting you on the spot, but if we could move this show to 7:00, some of us might get to go to bed at a reasonable hour, and you're the only person that we would probably hate to, not be here. Everybody else has said, yeah, we could probably do that, but we want to make sure you're able to be here for the show. So think about that. Give us an answer whenever you want to, because you're an important, huge part of this show. We appreciate you.
Well,
all right. I think I've stalled long enough, because I don't have one. I'm going to take the foghorn. I just want to congratulate Jen for getting another out of the over the stratosphere guest here, Jen. We thank you for doing that.
Wow.
And,
you're welcome.
And thank you for staying up late to make it go, because this interview could keep on going till midnight. Probably.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But all right, Mark, we'll put you on the spot now. What you got for us? Pick of the week.
Yeah, I'm glad I did something other than just read the IPCC report today, because I was kind of saying, well, if nobody else brings that up, I mean, you got to bring that up today, right? That has to be the pick. So then, the UN report that came out kind of with the IPCC report, where they are, you could argue, even darker than the IPCC report. So if you're really feeling like you need a good, cheap scotch on the linoleum floor rocking in the corner, then pick up the UN report after looking at the IPCC report, because it'll work for you. It'll really do it. So I did that this morning. I read through both of those and needed a break. And so I started looking at anything else. And I found this thing that was really interesting to me. So I don't know if any of you guys agree with this, but, as a kid, I was really into weather, and it was always going to be weather. But there was also this, small window where marine biology seemed really interesting, and how every little kid wants to be a vet. Well, maybe that's part of it, but I still have this little piece that's really interested in what's crawling down on the bottom of the ocean. And so I found this story today while, again, looking for anything that wasn't the IPCC report, and found out about the sunflower sea star. And so the sunflower sea star is, I'm picturing, starfish, how cute, is apparently the size of a manhole cover at its smallest. The adult sea star, sunflower sea star is a manhole cover, okay? This thing's significant. 20, hey, keep it down. Has 24 different arms on it or something. And they're these amazing colors, purples and oranges. And apparently these things are the beasts of the West Coast ecosystem, that they used to be top predator, that they would go through the seafloor, and all of the oysters and clams and all this, they would eat them whole, right? Just gulp, sea star, no problem, full shell, I'll just crawl right over that, get all crazy and eat this whole thing. Can you imagine? Right? So I'm reading about this, and then of course, because of the life that is 2020, 2021, they're turning into goo. There's some sort of disease going through the sea stars that just decimates their body, and they turn into a puddle of mush. And so there's this group of scientists that are now fostering giant sunflower sea stars. And I'm forget about fostering a puppy, okay? This is what we all need to be doing now. New life goal, foster the sunflower sea star, and apparently they start as a little orange speck, a pinhead size, and then eventually turn into manhole cover sea star. And I hope that someday this rescue mission by these scientists that are out there trying to save this population work, and I can again take my kids out to the West Coast. Apparently they used to have a range from like Alaska to Mexico. Like these things were just prolific. And I hope they're back someday, because seeing a manhole cover of 24 arms walking by and eating mollusks just seems to be something that should be on everybody's list to be able to see.
Then there'll be some invasive species because people will take them and drop them in a river, and then who knows what'll happen from there.
Don't do that.
Yeah, don't do that. But it's been a great show, Marty. Thank you for joining us tonight. Thank you, Tim, for arranging it. Any other further business before we adjourn?
No.
All right. Well, then let's see. If there is no further business, I'll just tell you that Weather Brains is the weekly netcast that's all about weather. We are generally recording the show on Monday nights at 8 o'clock Central Time. It may move sometime in the future. I don't know, because some of us are getting too old to stay up late, but it is a labor of love that we've been doing for nearly 16 years now. If you're new to the show, you can access it any of the general ways that you get your podcasts, also at weatherbrains.com, alabamawx.com, and you can watch live on bigbrainsmedia.com at live.bigbrainsmedia.com. And when we're showing, so if you have guest suggestions, comments, links, rants, anything else, send it to email@weatherbrains.com. But until next Monday night, I'm guest booking officer, or maybe former guest booking officer, Bill Murray, reminding you to keep an eye to the sky, because you'll always have something fun to look at.